Friends, welcome back my YouTube channel. If you want to watch the super hit movie The Revenant in full HD, then first of all, give this video a like, and if you are visiting our channel for the first time, then subscribe to this channel. The name of the movie we are going to discuss in today's video is The Revenant. So we will give you information about how and where you will get to watch The Revenant film officially. Apart from this, we will give you a detailed look at the pre-production, post-production, budget, box office collection, and filming of this movie. A detailed review of the movie will also be given in this video where we will explain the story of this movie in detail. We will also discuss the cast and casting performance of the movie. Apart from this, information about the music department and technical department will also be given. Because of this video is going to be very interesting and entertaining. So you must watch this video till the end. And if you haven't liked this video yet, then like this video now and subscribe to this channel. So let's start the video. The Revenant is a 2015 American epic Western action drama film directed by Alejandro G. Iñárritu. The screenplay by Mark L. Smith and Iñárritu is based in part on Michael Punk's 2002 novel, The Revenant, which describes frontiersman Hugh Glass's experiences in 1823. The film stars Leonardo DiCaprio as Glass, alongside Tom Hardy, Domhnall Gleeson, and Will Poulter. In August 2001, Akiva Goldsman purchased Punk's manuscript. Iñárritu signed on to direct The Revenant in August 2011. In April 2014, after several delays due to other projects, Iñárritu confirmed that he was beginning work on it and that DiCaprio had the lead role. Principal photography began in October 2014. Location and crew concerns delayed production from May to August 2015. The Revenant premiered at TCL Chinese Theater in Los Angeles, California on December 16, 2015. It had a limited release on December 25th and a wide release on January 8, 2016. It was a blockbuster, grossing $533 million worldwide. It received critical acclaim, with praise for the performances, particularly for DiCaprio and Hardy, Iñárritu's direction, and Emmanuel Lubezki's cinematography. However, some criticism went to its runtime. It won 3 Golden Globe Awards and 5 BAFTA Awards, including Best Film at both ceremonies. At the 88th Academy Awards, the film received 12 nominations, including Best Picture and Best Supporting Actor, Hardy. It won the Academy Awards for Best Director, Iñárritu, his second consecutive in that category. Best Actor, DiCaprio, his first after 5 previous nominations, and Best Cinematography, Emmanuel Lubezki, his third consecutive in that category. DiCaprio also won the Golden Globe Award, the Screen Actors Guild Award, the BAFTA Award, and the Critics' Choice Award for Best Actor. Plot: fur trapper Hugh Glass watches as American soldiers burn down a Native American village on the Great Plains. Years later, in late 1823, during the Araucarian War, Glass guides Captain Andrew Henry's trappers through the unorganized territory of the present-day Dakotas. While he and his half-Pawnee son, Hawk, are hunting, the company's camp is attacked by an Araucarian war party which is seeking to recover its chief's abducted daughter, Powaka. Many of the trappers are killed during the fight, and the rest of them escape onto a boat. Guided by Glass, the survivors begin a trek to Fort Kiowa on foot because Glass believes traveling down the Missouri River will make them vulnerable. After docking, the crew stash their pelts near the shore. While scouting game, Glass is mauled and left near death by a grizzly bear. Fearing another Araucarian attack, Trapper John Fitzgerald argues that the group must mercy kill Glass and keep moving. Henry agrees, but he is unable to pull the trigger. Instead, he offers to pay anyone who will stay with Glass and bury him after he dies. When the only volunteers are Hawk and the young Jim Bridger, Fitzgerald, wanting the money to recoup his losses from the abandoned pelts, also agrees to stay. After the others leave, Fitzgerald attempts to smother Glass but is stopped when Hawk intervenes. Fitzgerald stabs Hawk to death as Glass watches helplessly. The next morning, Fitzgerald convinces Bridger, who is unaware of Hawk's murder, that the Araucarian are approaching and they must abandon Glass. At first, Bridger protests, but he ultimately follows Fitzgerald after the latter leaves Glass half buried alive in a makeshift grave. Bridger leaves behind a canteen on which he had engraved a spiral symbol. The next morning, Bridger forces Fitzgerald to admit that there are no pursuing Araucarian. They reach the fort, and Fitzgerald falsely reports to Henry that Hawk vanished and Glass died. Bridger is complicit in the lie about Glass's death, but remains unaware of Hawk's murder. Glass starts an arduous journey through the wilderness, bringing Bridger's canteen with him. He performs a crude cauterization of his wounds and eludes the pursuing Arikara by jumping into river rapids. He encounters Pawnee refugee Hikuk, who tells Glass that revenge is in the creator's hands. The men share bison meat and travel together. As a storm approaches, Hikuk constructs a sweat lodge for the feverish Glass to shelter in. After a hallucinogenic experience in the lodge, Glass emerges to discover that French-Canadian hunters have lynched Hikuk. Glass infiltrates the hunters' camp and sees their leader, Toussaint, raping Powaka. Glass frees her. With a knife provided by Glass, she threatens Toussaint with castration to silence him from alerting the other Frenchmen, and then flees while Glass kills several hunters and recovers Hikuk's horse, leaving Bridger's canteen behind. The following day, Glass is ambushed by the Arikara and drives over a cliff on his horse as he escapes their pursuit. He survives the night by disemboweling the dead horse and sheltering Nude inside its carcass. A French survivor staggers into Fort Kiowa, and Bridger recognizes the man's spiral-engraved canteen. Believing that it was stolen, Henry organizes a search party. Fitzgerald, realizing that Glass is alive, empties the outpost safe and flees, intending to reach Texas. The search party finds the exhausted Glass. Furious, Henry orders the arrest of Bridger upon returning to the fort, but Glass vouches for him, saying Bridger was deceived by Fitzgerald, who murdered Hawke. Glass and Henry set out in pursuit of Fitzgerald. After the two men split up, Fitzgerald ambushes, kills, and scalps Henry. Glass props up Henry's corpse on his horse to act as a decoy, taking its place himself to ambush Fitzgerald and shoot him in the shoulder. He pursues Fitzgerald to a riverbank where they engage in a brutal fight. Glass is about to kill Fitzgerald, but he spots a band of Arikara downstream. He remembers Hikuk's words and pushes Fitzgerald downstream into the hands of the Arikara. Their chief, Elk Dog, kills Fitzgerald by stabbing him in the head and then scalps his body, and the Arikara, who have found Powaka, spare Glass. Glass retreats into the mountains where he is visited by his wife's spirit. Cast: Leonardo DiCaprio as Hugh Glass, Tom Hardy as John S. Fitzgerald, Domhnall Gleeson as Andrew Henry, Will Poulter as Jim Bridger, Forrest Goodluck as Hawke, Paul Anderson as Anderson, Christopher Joner as Murphy, Dwayne Howard as Elk Dog, Milo Nakeko as Powaka, Arthur Red Cloud as Hickox, Lucas Haas as Jones, Brendan Fletcher as Fryman, Tom Guiry as Billy Brother Trapper, Grace Dove as Hugh Glass's wife, Fabrice Ade as Toussaint. Production. Development of The Revenant began in August 2001 with producer Akiva Goldsman acquiring the rights to Michael Punk's then unpublished manuscript. David Ray Bay had written the film's script. The production was picked up by Park Chan-wook, with Samuel L. Jackson in mind to star. Park later left the project. The development stalled until 2010 when Mark L. Smith wrote a new adaptation of the novel for Steve Golin's anonymous content. In May 2010, Smith revealed that John Hillcoat was attached to direct the film and that Christian Bale was in negotiation to star. Hillcoat left the project in October 2010. Jean-François Richet was considered to replace him, but Alejandro G. Iñárritu signed on to direct in August 2011. Goldsman was also confirmed to be producing with Weed Road Pictures. In November, New Regency Productions joined to produce with anonymous content, and 20th Century Fox was confirmed to be distributing the film. Days later, Iñárritu stated that he was seeking Leonardo DiCaprio and Sean Penn for the two lead roles. Once Iñárritu agreed to direct, he began working with Smith on script rewrites. In an interview with Creative Screenwriting, Smith admitted that during this process, he was unsure if Iñárritu would even be able to film some of the sequences they wrote. He recalled, "He would have some ideas, and I would say, 'Alejandro, we can't pull this off. It's not going to work.' And he would say, 'Mark, trust me, we can do this.'" In the end, he was right. The project was put on hold in March 2012, as New Regency hired Iñárritu to direct an adaptation of Flim Flam Man, Jennifer Vogel's non-fiction book about her criminal father. Penn was also under consideration for the lead role in that film. In December 2012, Iñárritu announced that his next film would be Birdman, or The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance, a comedy drama about an actor who once played a famous superhero. He ended up winning the Academy Awards for Best Director and Best Original Screenplay, with the film winning Best Picture. Filming took place in March 2013. The Revenant was scheduled to begin production right after Birdman wrapped. A production budget of $60 million was granted, with $30 million funded by New Regency. Brett Ratner's RatPac Dune Entertainment, a joint venture between Ratner's RatPac Entertainment and Fox's former financing partner, Dune Entertainment, also funded the film. Worldview Entertainment, which also co-financed Birdman, was originally set to fund the film but backed out in July 2014 due to the departure of CEO Christopher Woodrow. New Regency approached Fox for additional funding, but Fox declined, citing the pay-or-play contracts made for both DiCaprio and Tom Hardy, which would require that the actors be paid regardless of whether the film is completed. Annapurna Pictures' Megan Ellison entered negotiations to finance the film shortly after. The Chinese company Guangdong Alpha Animation and Culture Company partially financed the film. Filming. Principal photography for The Revenant began in October 2014. A planned 2-week break from filming in December was extended to 6 weeks, which forced Tom Hardy to drop out of Suicide Squad. In February 2015, Iñárritu, who shot the film using natural lighting, stated that production would last until the end of April or May, as the crew is shooting in such remote, faraway locations that, by the time we arrive and have to return, we have already spent 40% of the day. Ultimately, principal photography wrapped in August 2015. The waterfall scenes were filmed at the Kootenai Falls near Libby, Montana. Though the initial plan was to film the last scenes in Canada, the weather was ultimately too warm, leading the filmmakers to locations near the Rio Olivia in Tierra del Fuego, Argentina, with snow on the ground to shoot the ending. Crew members often complained about difficult filming, with many quitting or being fired. Mary Parent was then brought in as a producer. Iñárritu stated that some of the crew members had left the production, explaining that, "As a director, if I identify a violin that is out of tune, I have to take that from the orchestra." On his experience, DiCaprio stated, "I can name 30 or 40 sequences that were some of the most difficult things I've ever had to do. Whether it's going in and out of frozen rivers, or sleeping in animal carcasses, or what I ate on set, I was enduring freezing cold and possible hypothermia constantly." Hardy lightly wrestled Iñárritu on set to release tension while during filming. Iñárritu had stated that he originally wanted to film chronologically, a process that would have added $7 million to the production budget. Later, he confirmed that it was shot in sequence, though Hardy had stated that it was impossible due to weather conditions. The terrain of the filming locations was not true to the actual Hugh Glass mauling story, which really occurred in modern-day South Dakota. In July 2015, it was reported that the budget had ballooned from the original $60 million to $95 million. And by the time production wrapped, it had reached $135 million. Visual effects. The visual effects were produced primarily by Industrial Light and Magic, ILM. Other companies such as Moving Picture Company, MPC, and Cinesite also created visual effects. Music. Main article, The Revenant. The musical score was composed by Japanese musician Ryuichi Sakamoto and German electronic musician Alva Noto, with additional music composed by Bryce Dessner. The main body of the score was recorded at the Seattle Music Scoring Stage in the Bastyr Chapel in Greater Seattle, Washington by musicians of the Northwest Sinfonia. Sakamoto conducted these sessions. Bryce Dessner's portion of the score was performed by the 25-piece Berlin-based orchestra known as STARGAZE, under conductor Andre de Ritter. Additional licensed music includes Become Ocean, the Pulitzer Prize and Grammy Award-winning work of John Luther Adams as recorded by the Seattle Symphony with conductor Ludovic Morlot, and an excerpt of Jetson Mila from French musician and composer Eliane Radigue. A soundtrack album was released online on December 25, 2015, and on CD on January 8, 2016. Milan Records released a vinyl pressing of the soundtrack in April 2016. The score by Sakamoto and Noto was ruled ineligible for the Academy Award for Best Original Score at the 2016 Oscars, as it was deemed that it was assembled from the music of more than one composer. Documentary. The movie was accompanied by a 44-minute documentary named A World Unseen, highlighting the process of making the production. A World Unseen was released on January 24, 2016 on YouTube. Elliot Rausch served as its director. Themes. In the Los Angeles Review of Books, critic Weichi Dimmock compared The Revenant's themes with those addressed in the literary works of James Fenimore Cooper, particularly The Last of the Mohicans. Dimmock argues that the film reinterprets the concept of half-breeds from a derogatory idea that Cooper despised to an aesthetic way in which to see the world. She compared both works' protagonists, Glass and Hawkeye, as literary foils, with Glass living an inversion of the latter's biography and perspective. In the documentary A World Unseen, the director stated that for the Revenant's main themes, he revisits the issues and concerns of intense parental and filial relations, which are readily recognizable as a recurrent theme from his previous works. Regarding the theme of revenge, he mentioned that the approach of vengeance in the film needs to be significantly tempered by anyone who would want to see vengeance as either an effective or useful moral to be applied in life. In the end, he said, there can only be a disappointment and lack of fulfillment for anyone who looks to revenge as providing a higher purpose for living or a life-defining purpose. Historical accuracy. The Guardian reported, the backstory about Glass's love for a Pawnee woman is fiction. It has been suggested the real Glass had such a relationship, but there's no firm evidence and no evidence that he had any children. As for the ending, it has been changed in one significant way. In real life, nobody got killed. Canadian actor Roy Dupuis was strongly critical of the portrayal of French-Canadian voyageurs as murderous rapists. Dupuis was originally offered a role as a voyageur, but he rejected it due to perceptions of anti-French bias and historical inaccuracies. According to Alan Greer, the Canada Research Chair of Colonial North America, generally the American traders had a worse reputation than the Canadians. The filmmakers made a special point of emphasizing the importance of historical issues of ethnicity approached in the movie and represented in the mixed ethnic background of Hugh Glass's son, portrayed in the film, portrayed as half Pawnee by Glass's wife, as relating to his own life and his identification with ethnic concerns. The director has referred to having encountered constant xenophobia and stated that these constant and relentless xenophobic comments have been widely spread by the media without shame, embraced and cheered by leaders and communities around the U.S. The foundation of all this is so outrageous that it can easily be minimized as an SNL sketch, a mere entertainment, a joke. I debated with myself if I should bring up this uncomfortable subject tonight, but in light of the constant and relentless xenophobic comments that have been expressed recently against my Mexican fellows, it is inevitable. Bruce Bradley of True West magazine pointed out several anachronisms hinted in the film, such as John Fitzgerald talking about his father having friends in the Texas Rangers and about going to Texas and joining the Army himself. However, in 1823, Texas was still part of Mexico, and therefore would not have had an American army, let alone the Texas Rangers. Another anachronism involved Hugh Glass discovering a mountain of buffalo skulls while working his way to Fort Kiowa, despite the buffalo slaughter not occurring until the 1870s. Native American culture. To portray Arikara culture accurately, the filmmakers hired several cultural consultants and teamed up with 2 linguists to provide faithful Arikara and Pawnee language lines for actors. Hikuk, the Pawnee man who helps Glass survive, is played by a Navajo actor. However, in one scene, a Pawnee character rescuing Glass is accompanied by a voiceover in Inupiaq, which is spoken in Arctic Alaska, thousands of kilometers away, and a different language family from Pawnee. The voiceover was a recording of Doreen Newtok Simmons, reading a poem from a John Luther Adams recording. The words originally came from an Inuk woman named Uvavnuk, an Angakuk shaman, and oral poet. Release. The Revenant had a limited release in the United States on December 25, 2015, including Los Angeles, making it eligible for the 88th Academy Awards, before being released nationwide on January 8, 2016. The film opened in Australia on January 7, 2016, and in the United Kingdom on January 15, 2016. In the Philippines, the film's release date was originally set for January 27, 2016, but it was eventually delayed 1 week to February 3, 2016. Although studios initially chose not to pursue a theatrical release in China, following its 3 wins at the 88th Academy Awards on February 28, 2016, the film was granted a release in China, but with several cuts. It was released on March 18, 2016. Home media. The DVD, Blu-ray, and 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray were released on April 12, 2016 in the US. Opening sales of the DVD along with online streaming orders placed The Revenant as #1 in sales at Amazon. Distribution to major rental outlets in the US was done on May 17, 2016. Piratsa. On December 20, 2015, less than 1 week before its release, screener copies of The Revenant were leaked online. The FBI linked this to Alcon Entertainment CEO Andrew Kusov, who denied responsibility. In October 2016, a former 20th Century Fox employee was fined $1.12 million in a separate case for uploading both The Revenant and the Peanuts movie online. Reception. Box office. The Revenant grossed $183.6 million in the United States and Canada and $349.3 million in other countries for a worldwide total of $533 million against a production budget of $135 million. In March 2016, before the film had completed its theatrical, domestic, and international runs, Deadline Hollywood calculated the net profit of the film to be $61.6 million when factoring together all expenses and revenues. In North America, The Revenant opened in limited release on December 25, 2015, and over the weekend, grossed $474,160 from 4 theaters in New York City and Los Angeles, $118,640 per screen, finishing 23rd at the box office. It was the second biggest theater average of 2015 behind the $130,000 4-screen debut of Steve Jobs. The film earned a total of $1.6 million from its 2-week limited run before expanding wide on January 8, 2016, across 3,371 theaters. It earned $2.3 million from its early Thursday preview showings from 2,510 theaters. On its opening day, the film earned $14.4 million, ranking first at the box office. The film grossed $39.8 million in its opening weekend from 3,375 theaters, exceeding initial projections by 70%, and finishing second at the box office behind Star Wars: The Force Awakens, $42.4 million, which was on its 4th weekend of play. It was the director's biggest opening of all time, and the 4th biggest for DiCaprio and supporting actor Tom Hardy. Critics noted that The Force Awakens had an advantage from playing at 781 more theaters, family-friendly Sunday matinees, and all North American IMAX theaters. Nevertheless, The Revenant played very balanced across the U.S. and overperformed in all states except the Northeast region. Its wide release weekend is among the top openings in January. Topped the box office in its 5th weekend overall and 3rd weekend in wide release after competing with Ride Along 2 in its 2nd weekend. It added $16 million in its 3rd weekend, which was down 49.7% but topped the box office despite a blizzard blanketing most of the East Coast, which reportedly hurt many films' box office performance. The following weekend, it was overtaken by Fox's own animated movie Kung Fu Panda 3, thereby topping the box office for one weekend. Following the announcement of the Oscar nominees on January 14th, The Revenant witnessed the biggest boost among the Best Picture category, jumping from $54.1 million to $170.5 million, an increase of plus 15% up to the Oscar ceremony in the weekend, ending February 28th. Outside North America, the film secured a release in 78 countries. It made $20.5 million from 2,407 screens in just 18 markets, placing behind The Force Awakens at the international box office chart and first among newly released films. The following weekend, it added $32.3 million from 25 markets on 4,849 screens. The film topped the international box office in its 3rd weekend, the same weekend when it topped the U.S. box office, overtaking The Force Awakens with $33.7 million from 48 markets. In the United Kingdom and Ireland, it took the number 1 spot with $787 million, or $5.2 million and $7.4 million from 589 theaters, and remained there for a 2nd weekend, declining by 24% with $3.86 million, $5.5 million. And for a 3rd weekend, similarly in Russia, it passed The Force Awakens to take the top spot with $7.5 million from 1,063 screens. In France, it has the biggest opening day in Paris and the 3rd biggest opening weekend of 2016 with $8.2 million. It also opened at number 1 in Mexico, $5.1 million, Spain, $4 million, the Netherlands, $1.3 million, Belgium, $1.1 million, Argentina, $955,000, Sweden, $914,000, South Korea, Denmark, Norway, Israel, Egypt, and Portugal, among other markets. In Germany, $4.6 million, and Australia, $2.9 million. It debuted at number 2 both behind The Force Awakens and in Brazil, $2.17 million behind The Ten Commandments. It had one of the top 10 openings of all time for a Fox film, not accounting for inflation in South Korea with $5.7 million, and went on to top the box office there for a second weekend with $3.22 million, despite cold weather affecting theater attendance, resulting in low box office performance in Russia, though not opening at number 1. It topped the box office in its second weekend with $4.4 million, more than The Force Awakens, and went on to the top for a third weekend with $3.6 million. In China, it had an opening day of around $11 million from more than 11,000 screens, including $250,000 in midnight previews, and $23 million in 2 days. In its opening weekend, it grossed $31 million, coming in second place, behind the animated Zootopia. IMAX comprised $2.3 million on 278 screens. In terms of total earnings, its largest markets outside of the US and Canada are China, $58.6 million, the United Kingdom, $32.8 million, Germany, $28.7 million, and France, $28.2 million. The film opened in Japan on March 23rd. Critical response. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film has an approval rating of 78%, based on 401 reviews, with an average rating of 7.80/10. The website's critical consensus reads, "As starkly beautiful as it is harshly uncompromising, The Revenant uses Leonardo DiCaprio's committed performance as fuel for an absorbing drama that offers punishing challenges and rich rewards." On Metacritic, the film has a weighted average score of 76 out of 100, based on 50 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of B+ on an A+ to F scale, and PostTrack reported audiences gave it an overall positive score of 85% and a 59% definite recommend. Reviewers cited in a CBS News survey of critics highly praised DiCaprio's performance, referring to it as an astonishing testament to his commitment to a role, and as an anchoring performance of ferocious 200% commitment. Peter Travers of Rolling Stone called DiCaprio's acting a virtuoso performance, thrilling in its brute force and silent eloquence. Writing for Vulture, David Edelstein called the film a tour de force and leak as hell but considerably more beautiful, but noted it had traditional masculinity instead of a search for what illuminates man's inhumanity to man. Justin Chang of Variety wrote Iñárritu increasingly succumbs to the air of grim overdetermination that has marred much of his past work, and it was an imposing vision, but also an inflated and emotionally stunted one. Stephanie Zacharek, writing for Time magazine, gave a positive review to the film, stating, "Iñárritu may have fashioned The Revenant as the ultimate endurance test, but as Glass, DiCaprio simply endures. He gives the movie a beating heart, offering it up, figuratively speaking, alive and bloody on a platter. He is the most visceral effect in the movie. Revenge served warm. Bon appetit." Richard Brody of The New Yorker was critical of the film and said that Emmanuel Lubezki's images were mere pictorial ornaments to Alejandro G. Iñárritu's bland theatrical stagings. A critic for a Santa Barbara Independent considered it a remake of Man in the Wilderness, 1971. The Revenant was ranked 22nd on Metacritic's and 79th on Rotten Tomatoes' list of best films of 2015. Accolades. Main article. List of accolades received by The Revenant. The Revenant has received numerous award nominations and wins, particularly for DiCaprio's performance, Iñárritu's direction, and Lubezki's cinematography. At the 88th Annual Academy Awards, Iñárritu won Best Director for the second consecutive time, Emmanuel Lubezki won Best Cinematography for the third consecutive time, and DiCaprio won his first award for Best Actor. Hardy lost the award for Best Supporting Actor to Mark Rylance for Bridge of Spies, and the film itself lost Best Picture to Spotlight. At the 73rd Golden Globe Awards, it won 3 awards: Best Motion Picture, Drama, Best Director, and Best Actor, Drama. It also had a nomination for Best Original Score. On January 14, 2016, the film received 12 Academy Award nominations, more than any other film at the ceremony, including Best Picture and Best Director, as well as Best Actor and Best Supporting Actor. On February 14th, 2016, the film received the most awards at 69th British Academy Film Awards out of 8 nominations, with 5, including Best Film, Best Director, Best Cinematography, Best Sound, and Best Leading Actor. It received 9 Critics' Choice Awards nominations, winning 2 Best Actor and Best Cinematography. Tom Hardy won the Best British Actor Award at the London Film Critics Circle and was runner-up for Best Supporting Actor at Dallas-Fort Worth Film Critics Association. DiCaprio was awarded Outstanding Performance by a Male Actor in a Leading Role Award at 22nd Screen Actors Guild Awards, and Iñárritu received Outstanding Directing, Feature Film Award at 68th Directors Guild of America Awards. It received 5 Satellite Awards nominations, winning the award of Best Actor for DiCaprio. On May 2nd, 2016, Time magazine included both DiCaprio and Iñárritu in its issue of the 100 Most Influential People of 2015, with a cover photograph of DiCaprio on the magazine. John Kerry, then the U.S. Secretary of State, wrote a short testimonial to DiCaprio for this issue of Time, stating that DiCaprio's dedication drives him to succeed, and that's how he takes himself back 200 years to create an Oscar-winning, bear-brawling powerhouse performance in The Revenant. In July 2025, it was one of the films voted for the Reader's Choice edition of the New York Times list of the 100 Best Movies of the 21st Century, finishing at number 271. Great film has the power to convey the unimaginable. We sit in the comfort of a darkened theater or our living room and watch protagonists suffer through physical and emotional pain that most of us can't really comprehend. Too often, these endurance tests feel manipulative, or even worse, false. We're smart enough to see the strings being pulled, and the actor in set never fades away into the character and condition. What's remarkable about Alejandro González Iñárritu's The Revenant is how effectively it transports us to another time and place, while always maintaining its worth as a piece of visual art. You don't just watch The Revenant, you experience it. You walk out of it exhausted, impressed with the overall quality of the filmmaking and a little more grateful for the creature comforts of your life. Iñárritu and co-writer Mark L. Smith set their tone early, staging a breathtaking assault on a group of fur trappers by Native Americans, portrayed not just as enemies, but a violent force of nature. While a few dozen men are preparing to pack up and move on to their next stop in the great American wilderness, a scene out of Apocalypse Now unfolds. Arrows pierce air and flesh as the few surviving men flee to a nearby boat. It turns out that the tribe is seeking a kidnapped daughter of its leader and will kill anyone who gets in their way. At the same time, we learn that one of the trappers, Hugh Glass, Leonardo DiCaprio, has a half-Native American son named Hawk, Forrest Goodluck. Low on men and hunted, the expedition leader Andrew Henry, Domhnall Gleeson, orders that their crew return to its base, a fort in the middle of this snowy wilderness. John Fitzgerald, Tom Hardy, disagrees, and the seeds of dissent are planted. He doesn't trust Henry, and he doesn't like Glass. In the midst of these discussions, Glass is away from the crew one day when he's brutally attacked by a bear. The sequence is, without hyperbole, one of the most stunning things I've seen on film in a long time, heart-racing and terrifying. Glass barely survives the attack. It seems highly unlikely that he'll make it back to the base. With increasingly dangerous conditions and a tribe of killers on their heels, they agree to split up. Most of the men will go back first, while Fitzgerald, Hawk, and a young man named Bridger, Will Poulter, will get a sizable fee to stay with Glass until he dies, giving him as much comfort as possible in his final days and the burial he deserves. Of course, Fitzgerald quickly tires of having to watch a man he doesn't care about die. He kills Hawk in front of an immobile Glass, and then basically buries Hugh alive. As Bridger and Fitzgerald head back, Glass essentially rises from the dead. The word revenant means one that returns after death or a long absence, and begins his quest for vengeance. With broken bones, no food, and miles to go, he pulls himself through snow and across mountains, seeking the man who killed his son. He is practically a ghost, a man who has come as close to death as one possibly can, but is unwilling to go to the other side until justice is done. The bulk of The Revenant consists of this torturous journey as Glass regains his strength and gets closer to home through sheer force of will. Iñárritu's Oscar-winning cinematographer for Birdman, Emmanuel Lubezki, who also took a trophy for Gravity the year before and could easily make it 3 in a row for this work, shoots The Revenant in a way that conveys both the harrowing conditions and the artistry of his vision. The sky seems to go on forever. The horizon is never-ending. He works in a color palette provided by nature and yet enhanced. The snow seems whiter, the sky bluer. Many of his shots, especially in times of great danger like the opening attack and the bear scene, are unbroken, placing us in the middle of the action. At other times, Lubezki's choices recall his work on The Tree of Life, especially in scenes in the second half when Glass's journey gets more mystical. And that's where the film falters a bit. Iñárritu doesn't quite have a handle on those second-half scenes, and the 156-minute running time begins to feel self-indulgent as the film loses focus. When it centers on the conditions and the tale of a man unwilling to die, it's mesmerizing. I just think there's a tighter version, especially in the midsection, that would be even more effective. About that man. So much has been made of this film being DiCaprio's overdue Oscar shot that I feel like his actual work here will be undervalued. Make no mistake, should he win, it will not be some lifetime achievement win, as we've seen in the past for actors who we all thought should have won for another film, Paul Newman, Al Pacino, etc. He's completely committed in every terrifying moment, pushing himself further than he ever has before as an actor. Even just the physical demands of this protagonist would have been enough to break a lot of lesser actors. But it's the way in which DiCaprio captures his internal fortitude that's captivating. His body may be broken, but we believe he is unwilling to give up. The minimal supporting cast is good, and it's nice to see Gleeson continue to have an incredible 2015. Also in Brooklyn, Ex Machina, and Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. Tom Hardy is less effective, often going a little too heavy on the ticks, wide eyes, shot up close. But I think that's a fault of the direction and not one of our best actors. In the end, this is DiCaprio's film through and through, and he nails every challenging beat, literally throwing himself into this character that demands more of him physically than any other before. What would you do for vengeance? What conditions could you surmount to get it? Or would you just give up? Our favorite films often drop questions like these into our lives, allowing us to appreciate the world a little differently than before we saw them. The Revenant has this power. It lingers. It hangs in the back of your mind like the best classic parables of man versus nature. It will stay there for quite some time. It's man versus bear. And bear wins. Or does it? Early reports of Alejandro González Iñárritu's intestine, straightening brutal and beautiful new Western thriller, The Revenant, have understandably focused on one quite extraordinary scene. 19th century fur trapper and frontiersman Hugh Glass, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, encounters some bear cubs in an eerily quiet forest and then hears the snuffly wet sound of their parent behind him, a grown-up grizzly who has gained a broadly correct impression of Glass's overall intentions. The ensuing scene is one of horrifyingly primal violence, a brilliantly conceived CGI reality cluster, during which I clenched into a whimperingly fetal ball so tight that afterwards I practically had to be rolled out of the cinema auditorium. The immersion and immediacy of that confrontation reminded me of the moment in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, when moviegoers go to the sensory-enhanced Feelies and watch a sex scene on a bearskin rug. They feel every bear hair. So could I. And I also felt every droplet of bear spittle, every serration of tooth, and I understood what it feels like when parts of your ribcage are exposed to fresh air and light rain. Some have described it as a rape scene. It isn't, but it's about power, fear, and rage. And this moment, quite as much as the human duplicity that follows, is the driving force for this film's theme, commoner in the movies than real life. Revenge. Revenge against men, and maybe a kind of revenge against nature. Screenwriter Mark L. Smith has worked partly from the 2002 novel by Michael Punk and partly from the real-life story that itself inspired the book. The adventures of Hugh Glass, a Wyoming mountain man who survived a bear mauling and went on an incredible odyssey to track down the two men who abandoned him to die. This story fictionalizes and intensifies his personal circumstances and payback motivation. Glass has joined other civilian privateers engaged in a U.S. military expedition led by Andrew Henry, Domhnall Gleeson, along the Missouri River to establish a lucrative fur-trapping base. Glass and the others are set upon by tribesmen warriors in an electrifying and terrifying sequence in which warning cries are silenced by the sibilant arrival of an arrow in the throat. Glass, an experienced tracker, guides the terrified survivor's retreat across country, where he is mauled by the bear, and 2 men are detailed and promised extra pay to look after him. Young Jim Bridger, Will Poulter, and John Fitzgerald, played by Tom Hardy with pop-eyed, truculent malevolence. Once left alone with their charge, they leave Glass to die in agony and figure on returning to base to pick up their extra pay with a fine tale about giving him a Christian burial. But they reckon without Glass's fanatical will to survive. Generally, immersive movies enclose, they put you inside. They dunk you down into what it is supposed to feel like. Iñárritu and his cinematographer Emanuel Lubezki do the opposite. They expose you to the elements. You are out in a piercingly painful cold, under an endless, pitiless sky. This is not an immersion that feels like a sensual surrender. It's closer to having your skin peeled. The images that the movie conjures are ones of staggering, crystalline beauty, gasp-inducing landscapes and beautifully wrought close-ups, such as the leaves in bulbous freezing mounds and a tiny crescent moon, all unsentimentally rendered. But there is also something hallucinatory and unwholesome about these images, as if hunger and pain has brought Glass to the secularized state of a medieval saint tormented with visions. Poignantly, he mimes shooting distant moose with a tree branch instead of a rifle. And when he suddenly comes across a vast plain full of bison, it's unclear for a second if he is imagining things. A ruined church looks like a miraculous example of cave painting. The Revenant recalls Ford's The Searchers and modifies its themes of tribal and sexual transgression and its cruel invocation of scalping. The warriors who attack at first are enraged at the kidnap of a Native American woman, Powaka Melau Nakeko. At other times, Iñárritu appears to be inspired by Herzog's Aguirre, Wrath of God, with the visions of imperial greed and the vast river in full flood. Or maybe his documentary Grizzly Man, in which the grim-faced Herzog famously listened on his headphones to the sound of someone being mauled to death. There is arguably something of Altman in the wintry frontier terrain, and certainly a Malikian weightlessness in some of Glass's dreams of his wife. But what is so distinctive about this Iñárritu picture is its unitary control and its fluency. No matter how extended, the film's tense story is under the director's complete control, and he unspools great meandering, bravura traveling shots to tell it. Not dissimilar in some ways to his previous picture, Birdman. Leonardo DiCaprio plays a real-life frontier survivor. Hugh Glass, a widowed fur trapper and single father who was on an expedition through Montana and South Dakota in 1823 in the company of his half-pawn son when he was mauled by a bear. Tom Hardy plays the betrayer Fitzgerald, who murders Glass' son and leaves Glass to die of his wounds in a freshly dug grave. The Revenant is Leonardo DiCaprio filmed through and through, boasting most of the elements we've come to associate with his star, vehicles. He plays a slightly aloof and mysterious character who is haunted by visions of a dead mate and traumatized by past experiences with violence. Often the two experiences are combined, as is the case here, and proves his manhood through feats of endurance by suffering, mightily or simply, by remaining autonomous long past the point where one might reasonably expect his character to have given up, collapsed from exhaustion, gotten murdered by enemies, etc. Glass might be the ultimate version of this DiCaprio hero, the apotheosis, the big kahuna. He gets symbolically killed multiple times throughout the Revenant, starting with the bear attack and continuing on through his betrayal by Fitzgerald. There's even a shot of Glass's gnarled hand rising out of the dirt, and then through his miraculous survival of a blizzard, inside a carapace made of tree branches by a Native American who respects Glass's tenacity and gets murdered by French trappers in the very next scene. Real Glass eventually recovered in sub-zero temperatures and sought revenge. This synopsis sounds like a long loss to Clint Eastwood, a picture about a monosyllabic gunfighter who is symbolically or actually killed, and then raised from the dead to exact vengeance on his tormentors. The Revenant might have made a good clip film, though surely nowhere near as visually audacious as the one envisioned by Iata plus minus a tilde, inverted exclamation mark. He and his regular cinematographer, Emanuel Lubezki, Shoot the entire movie in available sunlight and firelight, usually through a super wide-angle lens that keeps the characters in the foreground and the landscapes in the background in a sharp focus while creating a bit of a gargoyle effect, distorting faces into ovals. The camera is never in what most directors would consider a typical place. And I add a +/- tilde inverted exclamation mark written, never cuts unless he has to. A lot of the time you're watching a close-up of somebody either speaking or listening, while the camera leaves lots of negative space screen left or right, or creeps slowly around them. These are horror movie strategies that prime you to expect a threat to emerge from off-screen, from behind the obstruction that is the character's face or from the background. It's the correct approach for what is in its heart as much a horror film as a survival story. The instantly notorious bear attack sequence is staged using the third approach, threat emerging from background. The bear charges out of the bushes and lays into glass for what feels like an hour, though it's really just a few minutes, dragging him, clawing him, biting him, stepping on him, fogging up his eyeballs with his stinky bear breath. Like nearly every other scene in the movie, this one is staged as a bit of primal theater, a Werner Herbert saga by way of Looney Tunes. As my friend Keith remarked, this is a movie about a mana who tries to survive nature's multiple attempts to murder him. Remember how your high school literature teacher taught you that one of the basic stories is man versus nature? Well, this one is nature versus man. A lot of the time, the best man can do is hunker down and pray. Glass drags himself across frozen tundra despite the bum leg and ghastly wounds, hurls himself down icy river rapids to escape Native American trackers, survives another Native American attack by riding a horse off a cliff and into a tree, and then guts his dead horse and climbs into its carcass to survive yet another snowstorm. The latter scene, too, is somehow simultaneously awesome and hilarious at awesome because by that point we are routing for a Glass to survive by any means at his disposal, and ridiculous because the film often plays like a tall tale about a frontier legend along the lines of Paul Bunyan or Job Henria, a man so driven that he slaps death's icy hand away and calls it the scene where Glass cuts the horse is a scene of caveman level, instinctual mammalian brutality, and also perhaps one of the great moments in motion picture history, illustrating the rich heterosexual actor's traditional deep-seated fear that he is engaged in an insufficiently masculine profession and needs to somehow compensate for that as the camera circles slowly around the horse carcass as Leo removes the animal's interior and then takes his clothes off and climbs inside. You may be struck by the fact that you're essentially watching yet another birth or rebirth scene inverted, and also something very similar to the only great moment in Ace Venture 2 when nature calls the scene, where Jim Carr's character, for some godforsaken reason, appears to observers to be born through the anus of an audio animatronic rhino. There's a scene in this movie where Glass traps a raw fish and bites its head off while it's still visibly flopping around. And another, where he tears a frost-covered elk skeleton apart and sucks the marrow out of a vertebrae. You feel pretty sure there's some fakery involved in these scenes and others, but DiCaprio seems so into the chewing and tearing, and knowing that you wouldn't want to place any bets. At the end of the film, when Fitzgerald and Glass face off, shooting and stabbing and grappling and cursing at each other, while Lubezki's camera lunges towards them, practically piling onto them like a third combatant. The fight is so intense, and the amplified impact splats and drizzly blood noises, and Hardy's borderline unintelligible yo-sate, Sam mutterings are all so loud that the scene tips over into slapstick comedy. And by no means for the first time, there's an odd black comedy streak running deep beneath the surface of the Revenant, but it's hard to spot because it's buried beneath the Lubezki's Terrence Malick, with chest hair camera work and Joy Sakamoto's mournful often. A tonal score, which apparently was performed by the Hard to Be a Man Orchestra. It is an incredible experience. A pulpy action movie in quasi-mystical peyote western drag, devoid of anything resembling a predictable image and never dull unless you're bored by the very idea of a movie like this, in which case it'll be misery. I could have watched it for another hour and not grown restless, though I would have reserved the right to continue finding it funny and to not particularly care whether the laughs were intentional or accidental. The Revenant seriously stumbles, though during its last 20 minutes, which set up that entirely predictable climactic man-to-man combat. Between Glass and Fitzgerald, the fight resolves itself in what the film wants, you'd think is a moment of enlightenment for Glass. But that is more the equivalent of the CIA claiming they don't torture prisoners when they actually subcontract to other countries. The real-life ending of Glass' story would have made for a surprising, even subversive finale after all that misery. He finally tracked down his betrayer, but couldn't kill him, because by that point Fitzgerald had enlisted in the army, and the army wouldn't allow a civilian to execute the soldier. According to a history net, Glass had to be satisfied with the knowledge he'd shamed his betrayer, a purse collected by sympathetic troopers, and the solid weight of his rifle again in his hand. Hard to recognize, though, he may be under so much of blood, grime, and unwashed. Mountain Man the Capri will boost the commercial prospects of Fox's Not So Merry Christmas Day release, which will lean heavily on its award-friendly pedigree to overcome audience resistance to its considerable length and extreme carnage. While the many acts of human and animal savagery are doled out judiciously over the 156-minute running time, they're attenuated to a brutal can-you-top-this-degree captured in the long, unbroken, takes that have become in R2 and Lubezki's visual signature, though minus the one-shot digital gimmickry of Birdman. The result is a film of robust, overwhelming physicality, filled with striking passages of pure cinema. Gada ultimately enthralled to a crude, self-admiring sensibility that keeps catharsis at bay. The film was adapted by Iñárritu and Markelmith from Michael Punk's 2002 fact-based novel, which ISIS set in 1823-24 in the territories that now make up the Dakotas, Montana, Wyoming, and Nebraska. While the film never specifies exactly where and when it's taking place, shooting took place faithfully centers around a fictionalized version of Hugh Glass DiPrio, a real-life man of the works for the Rocky Mountain FO, skillfully guiding beaver trappers deep into a hostile terrain. Theirs is a life of hard work, scarce rations, and frequent apparel. As we witness firsthand when the men are attacked without warning by arrow warriors, the film establishes its Taluk approach immediately in this harrowing early sequence, beginning with the single unbroken shot in which tension mounts by the second, only to be relieved by the arrow that comes hurtling out of nowhere to connect with a man's throat. As the surviving trappers flee with whatever pelts they can salvage, we feel not just ambushed but surrounded by the attackers, lurking just off-screen by the dense trees looming in Lubezki's deep focus compositions, and perhaps most of all by the astonishing sound design, which transforms the music of babbling brooks, rustling trees, thunderous hoof beats, falling bodies, and anguished screams into a wild symphony of woodland chaos. These sounds will be joined in due course by Ryuichi Sakamoto and Alvinoto's artfully modulated, never-repetitive score, which begins as a series of low synthic crumbles that gather melodic force and power as the film progresses. In short, the Revenant must be appreciated first and foremost as a sensory and aesthetic marvel, a brutal hymn to the beauty and terror of the natural world that exerts a hypnotic pull from the opening frame. Its deficiencies as a human drama and a metaphysical meditation will take a bit longer to emerge. Glass is traveling with his teenage son, Hawk Forrest Good Luck, a descendant of the Pony tribe on his mother's side, and the two regard each other with an understandably fierce protectiveness. The other trappers, led by the principled Captain Andrew Henry, Domhnall Gleeson, prove respectful enough of father and son, with the singular exception of John Fitzgerald, Tom Hardy, and Estanara Dowell, who makes no secret of the fact that his commitment to the party's mission is purely mercenary. And so there's trouble afoot, even before Glass ventures out alone and is mauled by a mammoth grizzly bear, in what must surely be the most squirmingly visceral scene of an animal attack on a human committed to the screen. All the more realistic and protracted for being shot in a single take. Glass kills the bear, but not before it all but kills him, leaving horrific wounds in his chest, back, and throat, and rendering him unable to speak or walk. The arduous task of carrying the injured party over the rocky and eventually snowy terrain soon threatens the party's safety, and it's decided that Glass will be left behind with Hawk Fitzgerald, and a young man, Jim Bridger, will polter excellent so that he can receive a proper burial when he inevitably dies. Things don't go according to plan, to say the least. And the full murderous measure of Fitzgerald's ruthlessness is revealed as he kills Hawk and leaves Glass for dead with the Apito, but the lust for Venancia becomes its own form of survival instinct, and a Glass manages to claw out his way out of a shallow grave, find food, water, and shelter, and stay alive long enough for his wounds to begin to heal. Cynthia, his character, can barely talk, and has almost no one to talk to. DiCaprio must convey Glass' interior journey almost entirely through grunts, wheezes, and sharp pain exhalations of breath, often misting up the camera and poetical close-ups. Often he does this while dragging his claw and battered her body over rocks and soil, a preferable method of transport really to being washed downstream by a turbulent river, or vaulted off a cliff on the back of a horse. These and other unimaginable detours, plus the near-constant threat of death from predators, starvation, and exposure, coalesce into a potent study of human endurance and isolation that makes up the film's stronger midsection, finally assembled by inert regular editor Stephen Marion. An unofficial retreat of Richard C. Safarian's Man in The Wilderness 1971, which starred Richard Harris' Saucy Glass, Iñárritu's film deviates enough from Punk's novel to have warranted a based-in-part credit, and the changes involve the various indigenous characters hovering on the periphery of the drama, including a hike Navajo actor, Arthur Redcloud, a traveler who comes to Glass aid and outdog, Dwayne Howard, an Arikara warrior trying to track down Hisa daughter Pau, aka Malawa Naiko, who has been captured by a band of French trappers. But the most significant alteration here is the wholesale invention of Haka touch that aims to humanize Glassania him closer to the right side of history and instill in Hema and even more primal hunger for revenge. Yet through no fault of DiCaprio or good lucks, the father-son relationship never develops sufficient emotional conviction to achieve the desired impact. It's immediately clear that Hawk exists solely so he can, and as NY melodrama pivoting on the loss of a child, provide idea an extra twist of the emotional knife here and there in our employees' ghostly flashbacks and hallucinations to convey Glass love for Hawk and his pony mother. But these visions feel like spectral banalities, and a reminder in some respects of the communing with the dead anti-hero of Biful. While the Revenant is many cuts above that career, Nader A. marked the director as a return to the same glum mood of near-cosmic despair, also apparent in 21 G's and Babel after his rare foray into cynical showbiz comedy with Birdman. In all these films, the virtuosity of the storytelling can't quite disguise Aladdin-ness and lack of modulation that suggest Iñárritu's chief talent is for bludgeoning his audience, sometimes artfully, sometimes merely artily, into submission. The final reckoning between Glass and Fitzgerald is grippingly staged, and audiences hoping to see payback exacted in full will find satisfaction. But here and elsewhere, Lubezki's camera, with its creeping, darting movements and stealthy 360-degree turns, doesn't seem to observe via the action so much as instigate it. The long-take action sequences begin to feel almost sadistic in their pre-planning developments that should be shocking instead to take on an air of grinding predictability. And at every step the performance as a suggested behind-the-scenes experience that couldn't have been much less. Aroused to the characters on screen, Ordeal.A, whether he's sanking his teeth and tow a freshly killed dumb meat, cauterizing his wounds with a torch, or stripping naked and sheathing himself in a still warm animal carcass, DiCaprio has never been T. Ferrero suffered for his art quite so vividly on screen. His frequently wordless stripped-to-the-bone may not match the live-wire energy and inventiveness of his histrionics in The Wolf of Wall Street, but it's as scrupulously, agonizingly a detailed portrait of human suffering as you could ever want to see. Hearty Hosea dialogue is perhaps the least intelligible element of the sound design. Makes a coolly unnerving villain whose ruthlessness lies in his gift for a bullying of persuasion, as well as his brute strength. He has another excellent on-screen opponent in Gleeson, having quite a year with Ex Machina, Brooklyn, and the forthcoming Star Wars, The Force Awakens, cast very effectively against type as a righteous man who takes class mistreatment as a personal insult. And Howard makes a fleeting impression as the Ara hunter who emerges every now and then to assert the presence of his people in a movie that is ultimately not a tale of Ana-indigenous tragedy, but of a white man's retribution. Perhaps the most useful comparison in that respect is with the New World Malik's 2005 film about the initially charmed, ultimately tragic first encounter between the Jamestown as settlers and the Native Americana tribes whose way of life they so drastically upended. Both films were shot by Lubezki and featurea ace contributions by a production designer Jack Fisk and costume designer Jacqueline West. Those relations have soured irretrievably by the time Iñárritu's movie picks up roughly 2 centuries later. The scourge of American imperialism has long since bloodied and corrupted up this once in paradise, but the key difference here is not just of setting, but also of sensibility. The title of The Revenant aims to give you this Renaissance Avenger a spiritual dimension. Ba, in attempting to stare at his dark, fatalistic vision tower, does something genuinely contemplative and cathartic, and A2 has managed to appropriate the beauty of Malik's filmmaking boot to none of its sublimity. Another word for which might be humility. There is plenty of amazement here to be sure, but all too a little in the way of grace. Yesterday I had the chance to go to an early screening for The Revenant directed by Alejandro in Hour 2, and it is a tricky film to review. Iñárritu directed. Last year's A Birdman, which I happen to think is one of the most underrated films of recent years. To me, The Revenant is a huge step up from that film, but your enjoyment of the film will entirely depend on the type of movie you like to watch. So I have come up with some questions so you can decide whether to see The Revenant or not. If yes, then The Revenant isn't for you. Do A in a 156-minute film. There's exactly 3 brief moments of humanity. 1. The bond between Hugh Glass and his son A2A. Native American man who rescues Glass, tends to wounds, and makes a shelter. A3. Domhnall Gleeson's Captain Henry is a good, honorable man who trusts people. But all 3 moments don't end well, so they aren't exactly motivating or encouraging in any way. Every other character in the film is a complete beast, and the film is unapologetically dismal and gloomy. A Tom Hardy's Fitzgerald is a complete monster. He only cares about himself and his own survival. It's certainly not the Western hero we used to get from likes of John Wayne. That's for sure. This movie makes Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven look like a birthday party. If yes, then The Revenant is for you. The cinematography in the film by Emanuel Lubezki is unbelievable. Filmed with all natural light, the grayness of the cold Montana scenery is magnificent and deadening at the same time. The water is unbelievable. Especially one scene where Glass gets thrown down a rapids in the bit cold. I still can't believe how they got some of the shots. The story of the brutal filming is near legend, with narrow windows of time with the right lighting to get every take. They had to move to Argentina eventually because Canada started to warm up. If yes, then you may find The Revenant exhilarating. I don't so a fair amount was tough for me to watch. I closed my eyes a couple of times. However, it was so immersive and new that I did find it compelling. I'd prepared myself for the violence, so that helped, but even then it was brutal. You could say I pushed myself way out of my comfort zone to do that every now and then. Much has been said about the bear attack, which is long and shocking. I watch and wonder, how the heck did they do that? I really have no idea. I know they used a combination of a real bear and CG, but it was flawless. is a film fan. I love moments in movies I can't figure out. Oddly enough, the more violent parts I felt were the Indian warfare. Ed is relentless in showing person after person get speared with an Indian's arrow, sometimes through the head, other times completely through the body. I've never seen violence quite like that before, and I'm not going to deny it impacted me. There's also so much of it. It goes from the first till the final frame and never gives a moment a breath. If yes, then The Revenant probably isn't for you. At 156 minutes, it is a slow drip and not that varied in what it is depicting. We go from Glass, getting attacked, getting abandoned, moving around on the ground, finding food, hiding from Indians, stealing a horse, building fires, etc. Basically, surviving day after day. It make the Mariana feel like a joyride. There really isn't one moment of levity or break from the horrors of the West. A traditional Old West survival and revenge tale assumes the dimensions of a harrowing voyage to the American frontier's heart of darkness in The Raven, and do a pushing, both brutal, realism and extravagant visual poetry to the edges of what one customarily finds in mainstream American filmmaking. Director, co-writer, Alejandro Arnon, cinematographer Emanuel Lubezki, and a vast team of visual effects wizards have created a sensationally vivid and visceral portrait of human endurance under very nearly intolerable conditions. This is a film that makes you quite glad to have been born in a century with insulation and central heating. The combination of stars Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hardy, the director and critical enthusiasm in most quarters, will make this Fox release a must for audiences in search of cinematic red meat. Something the story offers up in abundance and mostly uncooked. Although vegetarians and viewers with otherwise delicate constitutions could spend half their time squirming with their sweaters pulled up over their eyes. For a director who normally takes several years between films, Iñárritu has remarkably turned around his most ambitious physical production within just 1 year of his awards. Zadina Birdman. Even the untitled eye would quickly recognize this as the work of the same key talent savant and may use plenty of cuts and is set nearly entirely outdoors. But the fluid prowling, sometimes gasp-inducing camera moves along with the great depth of field are the same. And both films are about men on the brink in seri extremistic condition that helps justify and sustain a Inarasa artistic high-wire act. It's a Jeremiah Johnson meets Apocalypse Now. Set in 1823 in the Rockies, less than 2 decades after Lewis and Clark led their map-altering continent opening expedition through the territory. The story is based on actual people whose real names are used in the film, as well as in Michaela Punke as a 2002 novel, upon which the script is quite accurately described as being based in part. In a way, the biggest difference between the novel and the film is that the former is aided by a map. Very specific descriptions of the proximity of rivers, forts, and other landmarks, which provide clear indications of how far the gravely injured hero must travel to get to what might pass for civilization in this context, but certainly not in any other. Iñárritu shares screenplay credit with Markel Smith, whose prior creative endeavors lie in the realm of low-budget horror, Satilda copyright ante the Vacancia duo at a whole, and the script immediately ups the story's existential ante by deliberately not revealing how long a journey mountain man Hugh Glass DiCaprio might be facing, or whether he has any realistic hope of finding any place with a roof over it. On top of this, any temptation to provide the central character with interior maniga to reveal his anguished thoughts and feelings has been resisted for most of the running time. He is limited to expressing himself via painful grunts and cries, and very heavy breathing. A startling early skirmish between the local pawn tribe and a contingent of white trappers serves notice as to the level of brutal realism the film intends to deliver. The who and sudden impact of arrows may never have been more vividly rendered, nor perhaps the sense of panic, confusion, horse speed, and arbitrariness of who survives and who does not. Glass, who previously served as the inspiration for the title character played by Richard Harris and director Richard C. Acar, finds a conspicuously less compelling a man in the wilderness in 1971 is a man of two worlds. He has lived with the Apanesa, for some time speaks their language, married a native woman, and is raising their son. But by virtue of knowledge of the territory, he's highly valued by the hunting expedition led by Captain Andrew Henry Dome Legism. Their ranks decimated and with winter closing in, the white men decide to head back, which brings on the scene 25 minutes in that which no one who sees it will soon forget, and which will certainly pass through the mind of any viewer who in future takes a hike through bear, injures her with the one shot he gets off from his long-barreled rifle, but then can do nothing as the incensed creature slaps, claws, bites, rips open, and steps on him with her giant paws before retreating. Beyond the sheer terror she provokes, the bear's behavior is fascinating to observe for a good while. She sniffs and assesses her adversary closely, both in the manner of a cook, judging the seasoning of addition, a kid deciding about whether to play with the toy any longer. She retreats a broken bar and then comes back for more. Previous renditions of such interpiece hand-to-hand battles have invariably been conveyed via a flurry of quick cutting to convey violent action while concealing the lack of real contact. Thanks to extraordinary visual effects work, Iñárritu can deliver the scene with an unprecedented degree of realism in a single shot. The impact of which is devastating. It's the latest and most startling example of the most sophisticated technology used in the caso felt realism as opposed to fantasy. The physical result of the bear's assault looks like something you normally find hanging in a meat locker. The last words Glass's wife said to him before she died were, "Keep breathing." And it's a command the man struggles to obey even when no one expects him to live. When weather and steep terrain make carrying the invalid impossible, the departing party leaves two men to tend to him. The hulking, ill-tempered John Fitzgerald Hardy and earnest youngster Jim Bridger will. After a couple of days, the duplicitous Fitzgerald all but buries Glass alive and abandons him as winter begins to close in, eventually lying to Henry that Glass died. Glass' struggle to survive occupies the core of the story, and it's a compelling, harrowing, sometimes challenging ordeal to behold, something beyond the reach of most mortals. Deprived even of his weapons by Fitzgerald, racked with pain and wheezing with every breath, the man can't even walk at first and is reduced to dragging himself inch by excruciating inch in search of food, places to rest, and ways to keep himself from freezing. Hand curling up inside a warm animal carcass. Glass encounters evidence of other violence involving the Sioux as well as a French trapping expedition. And there are visually astounding moments when the man gets swept down a series of rapids in a frigid river. Dapria and 5 personal stunt doubles doubtless suffered the consequences and goes over a cliff on horseback, which Arua and the Lubisha contrived to cover in an uncut take. The wonders never cease. After about an hour of screen time, Glass manages to make his way to the fort, exposing Fitzgerald's lie. But his deceptions know no limits, and he makes his escape, which obliges Glass to set out once again in an attempt to achieve revenge and justice in an elaborate and gory Western amano. The very different settings may disguise the fact, but the recent film of the Ravinata actually resembles a great deal is Gravity at the Outer Space Smash, directed by an Arasa, friend and colleague Alan Sokwaran. Both are solitary survival stories set in deeply inhospitable environments where human beings cannot survive without the aid of man-made equipment. Not to mention uncanny resourcefulness. Both are projects dependent upon the long-term commitment and charisma of a top star to get them made. The advances in special visual effects to make them seamlessly credible, and the brilliance of cinematographer Lubisha to provide the highest level of visual astonishment. Both projects were big gambles even for filmmakers as accomplished as these two to take on, and they both pulled them off. Obscured by heavy animal skins, a scruffy beard, and even longer hair, DiCaprio perseveres with a deeply committed characterization that embodies reserves of strength, resilience, imagination, fortitude, and righteousness. All attributes required for long-term survival in the earliest days on the North American frontier. Sporting a bizarre accent that could be described as pre-Hilly-spect, with traces of 19th century urban, the equally disheveled-looking Hardy creates a genuinely disturbing character, whose primary trait is untrustworthiness on a psychotic level. This year alone, the actor has created at least 4 memorable big-screen characterizations in which you can't really understand everything he says. And Hardy far exceeds the basic requirement for this role, which was to portray a man so despicable that the audience desperately wants to see him get his just desserts. Iglesia and Ultra are very good in the principal other roles of note. In Our Ritual makes the interesting decision to break the fourth wall, so to speak. In 3 instances, to acknowledge the presence of the camera in relation to the actors, not once but twice, he gets in so close to Capria that the actor's breath fogs the lens. The director presumably could have chosen alternate takes, but decided to use these. It's difficult to think of other examples of this happening in a major Hollywood feature. Then, at a very key moment, DiCaprio looks right into the lens, a move that throws you for a split second, but then achieves the greater effect of establishing a more intense relationship with the suffering Glass has endured. Lube's kiss-a-camera wizardry has been duly noted and rewarded for years, and his extraordinary work here under hugely difficult conditions will only add to his laurels. Iñárritu went out of his way to select locations mostly in the mountains north of Calgary, Alberta, then in Argentina for the climactic sequence when the snow melted early in Canada that had never been seen in the cinema before. The intention was to create the feeling of the virgin territory land, unfamiliar to the white characters as well as the audience, using very short lenses to produce great depth of field. A Lubeski is shot entirely with natural light, which mostly but not entirely results in soft grayish skies that due to the season seem only half lit. It has been noted before, Buant indicates more than any film Lubeskia has shot the influence of the Russian team of director Kyle Kaladova and cinematographer Sergei Ruskia on his work. The Cranes are flying and I'm Cuba are well known in the United States. Letter, never sent a 1959 less so, but it's the latter film's amazing long, often handheld takes moving through dense brush forests at one point on fire. Lakes, downpours, and snowstorms that clearly looked like early models for Wadoobs achieves and admittedly surpasses here, having handled such notable prior evocations of Frontier America 8 Days of Heaven at the New World, and there will be blood. A production designer, Jaka Fiska, is entirely in his element here, as is another Trenia Mika regular costume designer, Jacqueline West. The score by Arai Sakamoto and Alva Anoto with additional music by Bryce Disner is effectively ominous and grim. 20th Century Fox. I've always found the movies of Alejandro Gonzalez in R2 to be exhausting in all the wrong ways, over long and in your face. Emmer's Perot's often profoundly depressing by beautiful. 21 grams and sometimes too reliant upon a single technical gimmick, the remarkable single shots in a photography of Birdman. That's not to say I doubt his brilliance as a filmmaker. I absolutely do not. His new movie, the endurance western, The Revenant, is exhausting in all the right ways. An elemental revenge movie that channels the Yukon spirit of Jack London, and James Fenimore Cooper, as well as great Northern whiteout survival movies like Sidney Pollack's Jeremiah Johnson, Bruce Beresford's Black Robin, Philip Kaufman's masterly but almost forgotten debut, The White Dawn. The Revenant offers this year's most hostile on film environment, after a seat German's equally snowbound and exhausting Hard to Be a God. It opens in the unspoiled almost. Didn't American-Canadian borderlands in 1823 as a large party of white trappers prepares to load its winter harvest of pelts for the trip back downriver to the nearest trading post, and for it almost that is because these pelts belong by right to the several American Indian tribe Asakri Pony and Saka, whose hunting grounds the white men are trespassing on for profit. The most valuable member of their expedition is their guide Hugh Glass, Leonardo DiCaprio, widowed husband of an Indian, woman killed in a village massacre by British troops, presumably in Canada, and father to a teenage son by her, and thus a man who stands athwart the several cultures that clash here. He speaks the various tongues of Native Americans and knows their methods of survival in the icebound wastes. But he is commissioned to guide and protect the predatory white men. After an opening that recalls the idyllic virginal America of Terrence Malick, the New World in its exquisite but malign landscapes and detailed soundscapes, running water, wind, creaking frozen trees, birdsong, the fronted Native Americans take their revenge as the trappers are preparing to embark downriver. Horses thunder toward the camera. White men scatter or are clubbed to death from horseback or skewered with arrows that land with sickening thuds in their heads, necks, or chests. Indians are in horse and slaughtered where they fall, and the harvest of pelts is mostly lost. What makes this sequence so astounding is the camera work of our regular cinematographer Emmanuel Lubezki. Its combination of the contemplative and the headlong is key to the power of the whole movie. White laros fly, guns blaze away, and bodies are torn up. Lubezki's Dedama moves through the carnage as if in a dream. Sometimes fast, but sometimes with the trance-like Zencom, slowly panning left or right, just in time to catch some new moment of the violence or several simultaneously. Seeing everything, always knowing what is about to happen and ready to witness it. Always in the thick of the action, but viewing it in a rowful and ruminative way, as if we are seeing things through the eyes of an unflappable, uncomprehending horse or wolf. This may be the most astounding and kinetic battle sequence I've seen in a movie since the outwardly very different trade on the Vietnamese village in Apocalypse. Now, there isn't a helicopter or hand grenade inside here, obviously, and no ride of the Valkyrio on the soundtrack. But that same wordly, exhilarating feeling of escalating violence and brute carnage can be found here as well, like much of the rest of The Revenant. It will push you back into your seat as you struggle to absorb its intensity and power, and leave you gasping for breath in its aftermath of 33 men. Only 9 are left alive, mainly through the resourcefulness and warrior chops of Glass, forced now to make their way home by the much more punishing and hostile land route. With Indians in pursuit, the party must rely on Glass to lead them home. The one wild card in the group is an ungovernable ex-criminal and trapper. Fitzgerald, Tom Hardy, a man constructed, entirely of greed and guile. As tough as glass, his skull bears the scars of a failed Indian scalping, but utterly immoral and self-centered, incapable of loyalty to the group's leader, Andrew Henry Dom. The next day, while scouting for the party with his teenage son, Glass is attacked by a bear after coming between her and her cubs. Here is another sequence that's almost unendurably violent as the bear throws Glass around, slashes at his back, chest, and finally his throat, then toys with his inert body, roaming away, briefly before returning to administer at more punishment until a barely conscious and immobilized Glass is finally able to kill her with knife and rifle. Domhnall left behind by the main party to nurse Glass toward what seems like his inevitable death. Fitzgerald instead murders Glass's son and then shoots Glass and buries him alive, pretending to his unknowing partner Bridger will polter that the Indians have finished them off. But this is a revenge western, and Glass does not die despite his horrific injuries. He lies for days half-buried until finally he can rouse himself to perform some nasty field surgery on those wounds, including most harrowingly cauterizing his neck injuries with gunpowder. Scarcely able to stand, riven by the bone-shattering cold, utterly alone, unarmed and horseless, he starts his journey back to civilization and vengeance. The parallel odysseys of killer and avenger take us across a magnificent, albeit minatory and godforsaken white landscape of hostile tribes, a predatory band of French trappers. They've kidnapped the daughter of a crefty for use as a sex slave, but the chief mistakenly blames Glass Group and the fearsome elements themselves. In R2 and Lubeski keep the frame packed with striking and somber images. A huge, daunting pyramid of buffalo skulls, a herd of live buffalo, one of whose number is beset by wolves. And in one flashback to the massacre that killed Glass' wife, we see a small green bird fly out of the death wound in her throat, as presumably her spirit leaves her. As with all the movies he works on, Lubeski is as good as the co-author of The Revenant. In the past decade, he has set himself challenges in cinematography, whose results are among the most breathtakingly virtuoso sequences in movies of the new millennium. It was he who masterminded the hair-raising 10-minute single-take reverse band chase and the magnificent long-take final battle sequences in Alonzo Cuarón's Children of Men. The quantum leap penis CGI technology that Gravity represented was also his work, did a Theroplex faux single shot that made up Birdman his last collaboration with R2. His signature is as indelible and as important to the films he makes as Dutch cinematographer Robbie Masters, as to the early work of Wim Wenders, or to Jim Joris's Dead Man, which in its silvery Dagara luminosity is a kind of brother movie to The Revenant. Here, Lubeski closely echoes his work for Milchan, The New World, in which he used handheld cameras for the untamed green breast of the Virgin America, while using lockdown-grounded camera work for the sequences set in the fiercely trimmed, regimented, and well-guarded Old World of England in The Revenant. However, he and In set themselves the challenging task reminiscent of Stanley Kubrick on Barry Lyndon, of working with only natural and available light to the sun, firelight, candlelight, and nothing else. The results are, of course, remarkably great fields of white dotted with bursts of green and brown, and a baleful sky ever-changing above the brutalized characters. One can only assume that Lubeski will win a third Best Cinematography Oscar in succession. He won previously for Gravity and Birdman. The camera work would probably count for a lot less if the performers were not equal to what was obviously a very demanding shoot. DiCaprio stretches himself almost beyond endurance for his role, spending time in freezing rapids, suffering blizzards, and at one point disemboweling his dead horse, which he has just ridden off a cliff before stripping naked and crawling inside its carcass for warmth. As his antagonist, Fitzgerald, Tom Hardy turns in another of his total immersion method performances, using a guttural growl in a thick phlegentric and static and menace. Coming after his distinctly different, uniformly excellent performances in Locke and the Drop and his double performance as both Crate twins in Brian Hal Jalen's otherwise disposable gangster movie legend, Hardy's feral and immoral work in The Revenant reaffirms him as the finest British actor of his generation and one of the finest full-stop violence, endurance, vengania. These are the things that exhaust us in The Revenant, not the emotional and moral exhaustion in order to impose uses upon us in his other movies. Here, everything feels hard-earned and honestly fought for, not forced upon us to endure. Although it is certainly an endurance test, Iñárritu has come close before, but has never made the movie as organic, unforced, and well-integrated as this one, nor as thrilling and grimly beautiful. I tend to strictly ration my usage of a flowing word, but here it is fully warranted. The vagaries of nature often wreak havoc in the minds of believers as they try to reconcile the hardships and challenges nature inflicts on the human condition with our insistence on a loving, merciful God. The best possible explanation comes from centuries of theological discernment and debate, but it is a simple one. God honors God's creation on its own terms. Nature will be as nature needs to be. That is based on the aptitudes and limits of its essence and design. Most every believer acknowledges these days that nature is not God's moral agent of reward and punishment because ancient biblical understanding was framed in a more primitive mindset. A nature simply is what it is, for God allows the material world to exist within its own laws and limitations, the occasional interventions notwithstanding. The same applies to human nature, particularly regarding man's inhumility to man. The suffering we inflict upon one another through God's gift of free will certainly vindicates God from any blame. A God's grace may empower and expand the good we choose, but the evil we display grounds itself in our freedom to act against conscience and inherent moral codes of the human psyche. A psyche, illumined and informed by the collective, and for believers God-inspired wisdom on display in the Ten Commandments, Jesus' Beatitudes, teachings of Buddha, Confucius, Muhammad, and many, many more. Spiritual reflection is inherent in the Revenant. A God is and never present what silent force in this narrative because of the way director Alejandro inverted. Marcus tells his story. Do the film, the script, and the sceneries all evoke questions about faith, morality, nature, and humanity. The movie is more than just about one person's survival or inability to survive. Spoilers here, in part because characters invoke Christianity, and in some cases, a false understanding of Christianity in key scenes. There's an implicit sense throughout the film that not only is the protagonist's life at stake, but so too his soul. All the characters hang in the balance between good and evil, with many, if not all, tipping the scale to the dark side as the audience, look on and ponder survival of the fittest and so much more. The Raven is a fascinating cinematic exploration of one man's attempt to survive the cruel, dark impulses of the human heart, and will in the context of all of nature's menace. Is it revenge that animates him, or something else entirely? The man in the question is Hugh Glass, an historical American figure of the 1820s Western expansion, and played by Leonardo DiCaprio, employing all the tools of the great method acting tradition with the plum. In a captivating performance, Leonardo reveals the inner struggles of a man confronting fears and prejudices, hate and greed on grand display among the wearing French and American fur traders and Native American tribes, for whom betrayal, scapegoating, and murder are often excuses for living. Furthermore, Hugh has many inner demons of his own, while at the same time his courage, intelligence, and his love and devotion toward his son Hawk in the memory of his martyr wife gain our respect and admiration. In many silent stretches of struggle, victory, and defeat, DiCaprio keeps us in suspense and ado. He deserves his Oscar nomination. And amidst all the human conflict, the magnificent vistas of Wyoming's majestic mountains, trees, sparkling rivers, and roaring waterfalls alternately cast their spell of beauty, grandeur, and indifference, just as God seems to do at times. Ether, the word means ghost or one that returns after death or a long absence, is an adventure story turned into theological reflection. Dare anyone who sees it not to be steeped in deep thought about life, nature, and survival, and the choices between fully living and mere existence. At times, the visuals are raw. The tearing of human flesh, the gutting of entrails, human and animal of the result of arrow and gunfire, fire and stone. And much has been written about Hugh's battle with the mother bear ferociously defending her cubs after his unwitting encroachment. Extraordinary computer-generated images, but the whole offers a profundity much greater than these individual parts. The film is slowly paced, contemplative, and that it stands alone among most modern cinema with the exception of the works of Terrence Malick, whose visuals also convey spiritual dynamics and questions of God and nature, such as in Tree of Life. At the crucible of Hugh Glass, we see on the screen, also serves as a test, to viewers' ability to pay attention to detail, to focus one moment at a time, to surrender the impatience that can occur when accustomed to so many fast-paced action adventures. Do a good for the soul. The Raven features stunning cinematography, seamless editing, and evidences first-class direction. A great acting too. Not in any way limited to DiCaprio alone. Antagonist Tom Hardy. Tom, as John Fitzgerald, is a perfect foil for Glass. And there are compelling performances by Tom Hall and as Captain Andrew Henry, government agent in charge of the Trader Security Forest Good Luck as Glass' son, and Arthur Redcloud as a benevolent Native American. The latter three provides some welcome moments of compassion and attempts toward a greater good. At the film's conclusion, offers possibilities of transcendence but remains ambiguous. A perfect opportunity to engage in conversation and debate with others about the worlds without and within. The Revenant is a 2015 film that is both a sprawling epic and an intimate biography which covers a time in American history where the West was not yet settled, and both the elements and the native population could cause a settler or trader to lose their lives all too quickly. The film is also a Western, in that it depicts the rough and tumble life of a frontiersman who was at the whim of not only nature but also hostile animals and native tribes who were lurking just behind the shadows of the mountains and the forestry that surrounded them. Hugh Glass, portrayed by Leonardo DiCaprio, is one such frontiersman who was a real-life person, skilled at being a fur trapper, explorer, and a hunter. While his story was embellished for other Revenant, the legend itself, while it may not have happened in all of its audacity, still makes for a great movie adaptation. The legend surrounding Mr. Glass involves him being left for dead after he was abandoned by the fur trappers. He was assisting in their quest to participate in the burgeoning fur trade in the far west of Montana, the Dakotas, and Nebraska. After a vicious attack by a grizzly bear while out hunting for food and provisions for General William Ashley's expedition, Hugh Glass was essentially left for dead by those men who had abandoned him, even though he was still alive. Glass had killed the grizzly bear who had attacked him, but was essentially rendered immobile by the attack and could not talk or walk on his own 2 feet for weeks. In the historical accounts, Hugh Glass was able to somehow heal himself enough to crawl, stumble, and walk over 200 next 300 chain kilometers to Fort Kiowa, South Dakota to survive. In the meantime, he had survived attacks from the native tribes, living in conditions of winter weather and brutal cold and avoiding potential hazards such as icy tundra, treacherous mountains, and other elements. The one thing about both the historical portrayal of Hugh Glass's story and that of a Revenant was how he thrived in those brutal environments, given his history as an explorer and a fur trapper. If you are able to live at the edge of civilization and make a living for yourself in doing so, you should never be counted out when it comes to surviving when all hell breaks loose. Compared to the historical legend Hugh Glass, thanks to the brilliant acting of Leonardo DiCaprio, is given a more substantive background that makes him a more relatable figure. In the 2.5 hours of the film, Glass is portrayed also as a family man, just trying to make his way in the world by making himself useful to both the fur trappers and the U.S. Army personnel who have come to take territory for themselves and make themselves rich in the unforgiving North American wilderness. In this cutthroat environment, there are no room for careless mistakes, and the viewer will see in the film just how deadly each day can be. If there is any wisdom that he wishes to impart on his family, is that he wants to give them the tools for survival, even if that means his own demise. Glass is not a perfect protagonist, and it is clear from the beginning of the film that he is out for himself and his family alone, as he does not let anyone or anything come between him and his son, Hawk. His deceased wife was a Pawnee Indian, and his son, Hawk, is half Pony. After the death of his wife, Hugh Glass is extremely protective of his son, Hawk, because he knows that the men he is traveling with do not see him as an equal because of his Pawnee background. Glass is committed to protecting his son because that is all he has left to live for. While respectful towards the Ponchi, Glass and the other fur traders are fearful of the Ikara who are out to find their tribe chief abducted daughter Palaka, even though they didn't take her. In order to survive, Glass has to defend himself and the other traders from the Arraic who are vicious in their hatred of anyone who has invaded their territory. After the fateful bear attack that severely wounds Glass, Hawk prevents the trappers from killing his father and they move on without him leaving John Fitzgerald and Hawk to carry him back to the fort where he can get medical attention. Unfortunately, Fitzgerald is a sociopath only concerned about his own survival and terrified of the heir attacking again. Fitzgerald kills Hawk as Glass, watches in agony because Fitzgerald was selfish in his desire to survive and leave Hugh to die. Another man, Bridger, leaves Glass to die as well, and they take his gun and all of his provisions, leaving him defenseless against the brutal elements, while Bridger is complicit. It is Fitzgerald who draws the eye and contempt from Glass in his quest for vengeance. Despite being left for dead, Hugh Glass is hell-bent on getting vengeance for the death of his son Hawk and wanted to get revenge on John Fitzgerald for killing his son, taking his provisions and leaving him to die in the wilderness. Through his knowledge as a fur trapper, his ability to track both people and animals, Hugh was able to survive the treacherous winter conditions, heal himself and his wounds, and able to eat buffalo and horse meat to survive. So much was Glass's desire for vengeance that he was able to travel the 200 miles to get to the fort to seek treatment for his wounds and gather up the strength to set himself on the trail of John Fitzgerald. In the case of Hugh Glass, an eye for an eye is warranted when his whole life, his wife, and his son have been taken from him. While the real-life story of Hugh, Glass is up for debate. Arnon draws the audience in through its stunning visuals, powerful acting by actors Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hardy, and the visionary directing by Ayada +. Ayilda inverted exclamation mark, whose tracking shots from the opening battle to the bear attack scene to the final fight scene between Fitzgerald and Glass will leave the viewer breathless. This is a pure survivalist movie of man against man in nature, but it also revolves around an emotional core of someone who is trying to do his best to sustain himself and his son in harsh living conditions. The movie setting is strongly intertwined with a perilous time in American history where Native Americans, fur trappers, French explorers, and even the U.S. Army were fighting to the death for control of lucrative trades and future security in the untamed yet wild territory of the Northwest region. DiCaprio and a tilde + Elda inverted exclamation mark written in mind for its unabashed portrayal of both the beauty and the brutality of the natural environment. It is a movie that highlights how precious and fragile our climate is and how men can negatively affect it through their desire for greed and power. Arnon is as much as a morality tale as it is a tale of the utility of revenge to men. One whose world has been ripped apart due to the loss of his wife and son, and another man who fears losing his money, his fur pelts, and his life to attack, are brought together in a struggle of good against evil. The film poses the question of his vengeance worth it, and how can justice be served in a world that is based on survival and not codes of morality or law? Arguably one of the best films of 2015, Revenant was one of the best films of this decade, and deserves a viewing. Led by an Academy Award-winning director, Alejandro Gonzalez, plus a tilde inverted exclamation mark, and starring an Academy Award-winning actor, Leonardo DiCaprio. Revenant is a jaw-dropping and powerful film that will stay with you after the credits roll. The film's themes are extremely relevant in terms of its varied focus on family, revenge, survival, and how to seek justice in a lawless environment. More than anything, it shows the fragility of civilization and how important it is to be able to put yourself in difficult and challenging situations to show what you are made of. Hugh Glass was not a perfect man, but he knew what it took to survive against all odds and seek justice against those who had wronged him and his family, even if it meant certain death. You gotta have expectations. You walk into a movie and try to be as open-minded and as objective as possible. But there is always that one film that is composed out of all these factors, and you just can't possibly imagine it being bad. For me, that film was The Revenant. Let's look at it in detail. A broken bar. It stars my favorite actor, Leonardo. Tom Hardy, whom I've learned to love and respect. The cast also had Domhnall Gleeson and Captain Eyebrows, real name Will Powder. The director is Alejandro Iñárritu, and the cinematography is composed out of the same guy who shot Burnman. A movie like that, you just got to expect it to be good. A broken bar, was it? Yes, The Raven is one of the best films I have seen a broken bar ever. I watched it with a couple of friends of mine, only one of which being movies fan like myself. One of my friends did not like the movie at all, and my other two friends liked it but couldn't watch it properly because of all the gore. Of course, my movie understanding friend loved The Revenant. What am I trying to say? Well, it's a tough production, and it's certainly not for everyone. The film is extremely naturalistic. Every fight, Every survival scene and every dramatic scene is shot the way it would have actually happened. The fight scenes are chaotic and bloody. My friends were disgusted by the reality the film depicted. I myself left the movie theater feeling emotionally exhausted. The Raven and his symbolism and metaphors with the story. The film presents a number of themes and motifs, and does so in a new and original way. It's impossible to make a movie nowadays that goes in depth of a theme that another movie hasn't analyzed already. The ideas the Revenant makes are not new, but are presented in an original and fascinating manner. Firstly, the movie does not specify the setting. We don't know when it happens. Although by the story we can guess it's around the 18th century, and we don't know where it happens. This is on purpose. The idea is that Hugh is at the end of the world, and comes back from hell and goes even beyond that, continuing to search for Fitzgerald after reaching the cabin to find revenge. The general arch of the film depicts the theme of man versus nature and survival, which the movie doesn't really analyze it that hard given that Hugh's survival is shown by the things he lives through and doesn't need an analysis. Themes and motifs the film does analyze are, I can guarantee the director of The Raven and is an atheist, given that the movie completely rejects religion as a source of hope and salvation. First of all, the only character in the entire film mentioning the name of God is a villain Fitzgerald. Next, there is a whole monologue Tom Hardy says about how God is actually survival, the squirrel metaphor. Also, in one of Hugh's visions, his son is standing alone in an abandoned and destroyed church, still looking for salvation after death. Finally, Hugh does not kill Fitzgerald. He gives up the only thing that has been driving him to survive because God must take his life, subconsciously suggesting that God is the thing that prevents him from taking that he has been reborn to do. Family is a driving power. As mentioned above, Hugh is not driven by religion, but by his dead wife and son. There are numerous times in which he dreams or has visions about his wife. He always sees her above or in front of him, metaphorically guiding the way and being a reason for him to move forward. Greed, racism, generalization. Fitzgerald's greed for money driving him to do despicable things, plus his hate towards all Native Americans for what they did to him. Connection between characters. The movie suggests that all characters are the same, each being torn apart by a different demon. The most obvious example is that of Hugh and the Native American who helps him. He too has lost his family and is on the way to revenge. He helps Hugh and pretty much saves his life only to end up strangled. Also, there is a 10-second scene in which Fitzgerald is depicted as Hugh. The scene, a red comet goes by Fitzgerald. After that, we see Hugh in one of his visions about the pyramid looking at a comet-like shape. To me, this scene suggests that they are both bound by different demons and are both stuck in their own timeless and spaceless universe. Man alone versus man. With people, this is an unusual one and a big one. The idea is that Hugh goes through all kinds of trouble when he is with people. His kid dies, he almost gets killed by a bear, etc. So when Hugh is buried alive and left to die by Captain Eyebrows, the kid leaves his flask with the carved spiral on it. To me, this is a symbol for all hope and survival Hugh has, which is formed by other people. Even though Hugh is alive, he is very hurt and basically dying during most of his time wandering in the wilderness. He is physically dependent on that flask for water. However, it also represents his need for others to take care of him, his hope based on humans. And although some may see the moment in which he drops the flask as a mere plot device, it's not after Hugh drops it. He spends a final night in need for help from others, in this case represented by him sleeping inside, another living thing to keep his life. After the night ends, he has found salvation. Winter has ended and is ready to finish his quest alone, both literally and metaphorically. Also, when Hugh goes after Fitzgerald with the captain, we see him holding a flask with a knot spiral on it, representing that he is still capable of finishing his mission alone. Next, at the end of the film, Hugh once again sees his wife in front of him, guiding him. Then he looks directly at the camera. To me, this shows that after Hugh didn't kill Fitzgerald himself, he didn't achieve the thing he was reborn to do and goes back to being dependent on others and seeks comfort even in the face of those watching. Characters we got background knowledge on, just the characters we needed to do so a lot. Hugh and Fitzgerald to stress why they hate each other and to develop the theme that they are the same, and a little bit on the Native American guy who helped Hugh again, to stress the similarities between characters, in this case, between him and Hugh. As for character development, Broken Bar, the path of survival, and for revenge, the whole main arch of this film, was the source of development for Hugh, which was logical and appropriate. At the very end of The Revenant, Hugh has Fitzgerald in his hands, ready to kill him. He sees the Native Americans on the other side of the river and lets go of Fitzgerald, saying that God should be the one taking his life, although one could see this as another disclaimer of religion. The scene suggests that religion is the thing that prevents Hugh from taking the thing he was reborn to. I found it pushed and out of place. It didn't fit in at all with Hugh's character development so far and didn't really feel as a disclaimer for religion too. Hugh's character development was about him becoming tough, and by not killing Fitzgerald because of God. Religion is opposed to survival in the film. So God is exactly what Hugh hasn't been looking up to. Hugh goes back to being lost and dependent on other men, which is showed when he sees him wife in front of him and seeks hope even in the face of the public when he looks straight into the camera in the very last shot. It's a real and tragic ending to Hugh's character. Yes, but it felt a bit pushed. Next, none of the other secondary character developed very much. I don't find it bad since we were introduced to certain types of people. The Captain Fitzgerald, Captain Eyebrows, who represented parts of society and didn't have the necessary plot points for them to develop. It didn't feel needed that those characters develop. Fitzgerald character didn't develop at all, but I reckon this was on purpose since he is the main antagonist and is needed to stay the same for Hugh to reach redemption and to get his revenge. Directing and cinematography. I'm not even sure how The Revenant was made. This is probably the most beautiful film I have ever seen. The cinematography is unbelievable, and the fact that the whole film was shot only in natural light makes it even more amazing. The editing was incredible. Those still shots of the environment at the beginning of every scene were so beautiful, and I just have to talk about the visual effects, especially the bear. That was a one-shot scene in which Leonardo DiCaprio's character was not CGI-ed. What the bear was, how that interaction between the real actor and the CGI bear happened, I cannot explain to myself, but it was amazing. The fight. Scenes in the film were brutally real, which made them great because it was needed for the plot and the meaning of the film, and shot originally imprecise. The last fight scene was freaking unbelievable. It looked and felt tense and real. The long shots were very beautiful, and the fact that The Revenant was so real and bloody made it a revelation and emotionally exhausting. Also, I can't not mention the sound. Editing and mixing, which was always on point and original. I'm not even going to discuss the directing, given that this is a film with so many original ideas and methods for making. One can guess that the directing of it all was hard, and obviously successful since everything in The Revenant worked and fulfilled its purpose. The one thing I didn't like in this movie were the 15 minutes after the captain died in which Hugh was going after Fitzgerald. They seemed dragged and unneeded, but it didn't really bother me since everything else was perfect acting. I mean, a broken bar Leonardo DiCaprio got lost in this role. He got lost, and you could see it in his acting and in his eyes. He became a huge glass, and it was amazing. I thought that it was going to be all dramatic acting, suffering and crying, etc. It wasn't. There were scenes in which Hugh found joy, and the little things in Leo showed us a whole different tray of emotions. Eating snowflake scene. And it was clear that the actor took the role at heart. The fact is that Hugh as a character did not experience that many different things, but the things that he did experience were depicted brilliantly by Leo. Tom Hardy, Broken Bar. What a great year for him, huh? Mad Max, Legend, The Raven, and A Broken Bar. This was one of Tom Hardy's best performances ever. He was so good at making us hate this character. No matter how much I tried, I couldn't see Tom Hardy Broken Bar. I saw the little Fr Fitzgerald and hated him. I maybe wanted just a tad more from the secondary characters, but that was probably because Leo and Tom were so great. Every other actor's acting seemed not as good. And some information about it, how do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.